So everybody wants to call themselves the boss, but can't handle boss responsibilities. When it comes down to payroll tax, when it comes down to sales tax, that's not your money. It's never your money to begin with. And you have the responsibility to remit that over to either the federal government or your state local authorities.
Brenda Rodriguez owned a medical clinic in one of Houston's wealthiest suburbs. She drove a luxury car. She lived in a beautiful home. She was respected in her community as a successful healthcare entrepreneur. By age 58, she was standing in a federal courtroom, listening to a judge sentence her to 25 years in federal prison. 300 months. That's longer than most people serve for violent crimes. Her crime? She orchestrated an $11 million Medicare fraud scheme so brazen, so systematic, that federal prosecutors called her responsible for every single dollar lost to taxpayers. But Brenda's story is just the beginning. Before we dive in, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Tonight we're looking at 8 wealthy Texas female executives who had it all. Corner offices, multiple properties, designer wardrobes, country club memberships, respect in their communities, and every single one of them threw it away for money they didn't need. From Highland Park to Houston, from Mansfield to Bourne, these women built empires. They climbed corporate ladders. They ran companies. They signed paychecks for dozens, sometimes hundreds of employees. And then they made one catastrophic decision. They thought they were too smart to get caught. We're talking about a chief financial officer who lived in one of Dallas's most exclusive neighborhoods and helped orchestrate a $65 million fraud scheme that the FBI called Ponzi-like. A San Antonio CEO who claimed her company operated in 64 countries with 5,000 employees, when the truth was 6 people working out of a UPS store mailbox. A Dallas business owner who lived in a $10,000 per month mansion in Preston Hollow, while stealing millions in employee tax payments to fund her luxury lifestyle. A small-town bank CEO who systematically used company credit cards to pay for her children's college tuition, her personal vacations, and even her own income taxes. And yes, that Houston healthcare administrator serving 25 years in federal prison. These aren't drug dealers. These aren't career criminals. These are educated, wealthy, successful women who had every advantage. And they're all behind bars right now. Their mugshots are public. Their sentences are real. And their falls from grace are absolute. Let's start with the woman who thought Highland Park would protect her. Case 1. Cara Delin Obert. Cara Delin Obert wasn't just wealthy. She lived in Highland Park. If you're not from Dallas, let me explain what that means. Highland Park is where oil money lives. It's where the Dallas Cowboys elite have estates. It's where the median home price is over $2 million. This isn't a nice neighborhood. This is where Texas royalty resides. Cara held the title of Chief Financial Officer for United Development Funding, a real estate investment trust based in Grapevine that managed over $1 billion in investor funds. $1 billion. She wasn't entry level. She wasn't middle management. She was C-suite, making decisions that moved millions of dollars with the stroke of a pen. She drove to work in luxury vehicles. She attended charity galas. Her name appeared on philanthropic donor lists. She was exactly what you'd imagine when you picture a successful female executive in Texas. Polished, professional, powerful. She had the career, she had the address, she had the life. And And then in 2016, the FBI came knocking. Here's what Cara and her colleagues at UDF were doing. United Development Funding operated 5 different funds. UDF 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Each fund was supposed to be separate, with its own investors and its own rules. When developers borrowed money from one fund and couldn't pay it back, that was supposed to be disclosed to investors. That loss was supposed to be transparent. But Cara and the other executives had a different plan. When one fund faced losses, they simply moved money from another fund to cover it up. They shuffled cash between the 5 funds like a shell game, commingling money without telling investors or regulators. They were essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul, except Peter and Paul were both groups of investors who had no idea their money was being used to hide losses in completely different funds. This went on for years. $65 million moved through this scheme. Prosecutors called it Ponzi-like. That's federal language for we can't technically call it a Ponzi scheme, but it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck. The scheme only unraveled when a Dallas hedge fund manager named Kyle Bass started asking questions. He suspected something wasn't right with UDF's financial disclosures. He went public with his concerns, and the FBI launched a full investigation. On a morning in 2016, federal agents raided United Development Funding's offices. They seized documents. They interviewed employees. The investigation took years, but in January of 2022, Cara and 3 other UDF executives went on trial in federal court. The trial lasted 5 days. The jury deliberated for almost 12 hours. And when they came back into that courtroom, they convicted all 4 defendants on all 10 counts. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud affecting a financial institution. Conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Securities fraud. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Court observers said Cara stood motionless as the verdicts were read. Then, at about the 5th or 6th count, she shook her head. Just slightly. A tiny no. As if denial could undo what was happening, it couldn't. The judge denied their requests to remain free pending sentencing. U.S. Marshals handcuffed all 4 executives right there in the courtroom. Cara removed her jewelry and personal items, and she was let out in handcuffs to begin her journey into federal custody. At sentencing in May 2022, U.S. District Judge Reed C. O'Connor sentenced Cara to 5 years in federal prison. He also ordered her to pay a $50,000 fine. Her CEO received 7 years. Her colleagues received 5 and 3 years, respectively. But Cara's legal team wasn't done. They appealed to the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals, arguing insufficient evidence. The 5th Circuit reviewed the case and affirmed the convictions, citing what they called an avalanche of evidence proving the government's case. Still not satisfied, Cara's attorneys took their appeal all the way to the United States Supreme Court, asking the highest court in the land to review her conviction. In May 2024, the Supreme Court denied certiorari. That's legal speak for "we're not interested." The denial came without comment, which is standard, but it meant one thing. Cara Delin Obert's conviction was final. No more appeals, no more legal arguments, no more hope. She is currently serving her 5-year sentence in federal prison. Her Highland Park mansion? Gone. Her CFO title? Revoked. Her reputation? Destroyed. Federal records show she'll serve at least 85% of her sentence before she's eligible for release, which means she's looking at roughly 4 years and 3 months behind bars. When she gets out, she'll be in her 50s with a federal felony conviction, unemployable in the financial industry, and owing $50,000 to the government. The woman who once managed a $1 billion real estate investment trust will be a convicted felon trying to rebuild from nothing. But Cara's downfall was nothing compared to what happened to Samantha Mueting, a San Antonio businesswoman who pulled off one of the most audacious lies in Texas fraud history. Case 2. Samantha L. Mueting. Samantha Mueting introduced herself as the founder and CEO of Icor Global LLC, a multinational commercial real estate provider, and when she said multinational, she meant it. According to her marketing materials, Icor operated in 64 countries. The company had 156 offices worldwide, including locations in San Antonio, Luxembourg, and Casablanca. It managed anywhere from tens to hundreds of billions of dollars in commercial real estate investments. It employed between 1,500 and 5,000 people, depending on which pitch you heard. Samantha's website was slick. Professional photography, corporate buzzwords, testimonials. The site claimed Icor had been in business for over 30 years and handled $47.5 billion in annual transactions. When potential investors Googled Icor Global, they saw exactly what Samantha wanted them to see. A legitimate, thriving international corporation. She dressed the part. She spoke the language. She knew how to pitch. And she convinced couples nearing retirement, people who'd worked their entire lives to save money, to invest their nest eggs into what she promised was a secure commercial real estate hedge fund that would provide steady returns. Here's what Icor Global actually was. 6 employees. Maybe. On a good day. The company's incorporation address, a UPS store mailbox in Helotes, Texas, not an office building, not a corporate headquarters, a shipping store P.O. box. There were no 64 countries, no 156 offices, no billions in assets. There were no 1,500 employees. It was Samantha, her chief financial officer, Josephus Delat, and a handful of people who barely knew what was happening. When investors gave Samantha their money, believing it would be invested in commercial real estate as promised, she did something very different. She forwarded their money to another individual, someone she claimed could generate returns of 25% or even 50%. She didn't invest in real estate. She didn't diversify portfolios. She essentially handed investor funds to someone else and hoped for the best. Spoiler alert, there was no best. One married couple identified in court documents as CW1 and CW2 invested $1.4 million with Icor. That wasn't extra money. That wasn't gambling money. That was the majority of their life savings. Everything they'd worked for. Everything they had saved. They believed Samantha's pitch about secured deposits and interest-earning collateral. They lost the entirety of their investment. Multiple couples lost millions. In total, prosecutors tied over $2 million in investor losses directly to Samantha's scheme. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. In October 2021, federal prosecutors indicted Samantha on 7 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of conspiracy to commit mail fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She was arrested, she was formally charged, and she was released on a $50,000 unsecured bond while awaiting trial. Most defendants in that situation stay quiet, keep their heads down, hope for a plea deal, not Samantha. While out on bail, she convinced a business in Smithville to invest $2 million with her. $2 million. While under federal indictment for fraud. Less than 3 weeks after being charged, she was already running the same scheme on new victims. She defrauded them of over $3 million in just a few months. When prosecutors discovered Samantha had continued her fraud while on bond, they moved to revoke her release. At a hearing to address the bail violation, Samantha pleaded guilty. Her attorney negotiated that prosecutors wouldn't bring new charges for the additional fraud, but she had to admit to everything. The total amount she agreed she owed in restitution, $7.2 million. Her sentencing was scheduled for October 2024, and 3 days before that sentencing hearing, Samantha filed a motion to withdraw her guilty plea. Her argument? She was actually innocent. Her previous attorney gave her ineffective assistance. She never personally received any money from the alleged victims. She shouldn't be held responsible. U.S. District Judge Jason Pulliam reviewed the motion. He listened to arguments from her new defense attorney, and he rejected the request entirely. At the sentencing hearing, Samantha's lawyer asked for leniency, pointing out she had no prior criminal history and supposedly didn't use investor money for personal gain. The judge wasn't buying it. Judge Pulliam said Samantha's testimony and position just strained credulity. He noted that in his 5 years on the federal bench, he had never seen such a stunning failure to accept responsibility. Rather than showing remorse, Samantha had doubled down, tried to withdraw her plea, and continued to deny wrongdoing even after admitting to the fraud. The judge sentenced her to 87 months in federal prison. That's 7 years and 3 months. He also ordered her to pay over $4 million in restitution to her victims. Her co-defendant and chief financial officer, Josephus Delat, received 5 years of probation. At his sentencing, he told the judge, "In the end, I really wish I never had associated with Ms. Mueting." Samantha Mueting is currently serving her 87-month sentence in federal prison. She attempted to appeal her conviction and sentence to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2025. The appeals court rejected all 4 arguments she raised and affirmed her conviction and sentence. She's 59 years old now. If she serves the typical 85% of her sentence with good behavior, she'll be released in her mid-60s. She'll owe over $4 million to victims who will likely never see that money. She'll be a convicted felon with no legitimate business prospects. The woman who once claimed to manage hundreds of billions of dollars is now managing prison commissary money. The CEO, who said she had offices in Casablanca, is sleeping in a cell. And the entrepreneur who convinced couples to trust her with their life savings is now inmate number 07849321, or whatever number the Bureau of Prisons assigned her. But at least Samantha didn't steal from her own employees. That level of betrayal was reserved for our next case. Heaven Diaz, the Dallas staffing company CEO, who lived in Preston Hollow luxury while treating employee tax payments like her personal piggy bank. Case 3. Heaven Diaz. Heaven Marie Diaz owned and operated Pursuit of Excellence, a staffing company based in Dallas. If you're not familiar with the staffing industry, these companies essentially act as middlemen. They hire workers, then contract those workers out to other businesses. The staffing company handles payroll, benefits, and taxes. Heaven's company did well. Well enough that she could afford to rent a home in Preston Hollow for $10,000 per month. $10,000 every single month for rent. Preston Hollow is Dallas's version of Beverly Hills. It's where former President George W. Bush owns a home. It's where Mark Cuban has an estate. It's not just wealthy, it's elite wealthy. And Heaven lived there in a mansion that cost more per month than most Texans earn in 3 months. She traveled internationally, she bought luxury goods, she wore expensive jewelry, she drove nice cars. To the outside world, Heaven Diaz looked like the epitome of success. A female business owner in a competitive industry, living the dream in one of Dallas's most prestigious neighborhoods. But Heaven had a secret, and it was about to destroy everything. From 2015 to 2017, Heaven withheld payroll taxes from her employees' paychecks. This is standard practice. When you get paid, your employer takes out federal income tax, Social Security, Medicare, all of it. That money doesn't belong to the employer. It belongs to the IRS. The employer is just the middleman responsible for sending those taxes to the federal government. Heaven withheld the taxes. She took the money out of her employees' paychecks like she was supposed to, but she never sent it to the IRS. Over 3 years, she failed to remit more than $3 million in employment taxes. $3 million that should have gone to the federal government went into her company's bank accounts instead. Former employees testified at trial that they warned Heaven repeatedly about her obligation to pay employment taxes. They told her she was breaking the law. They explained the consequences. Heaven's own accountant warned her. He spelled it out clearly. You have to send this money to the IRS. This isn't optional. This is federal law. Heaven ignored everyone. She kept the money in her company bank accounts, and then she used it for personal expenses, international trips, luxury goods, and that $10,000 per month rent on her Preston Hollow mansion. But wait, it gets even more ridiculous. Heaven was indicted in 2023 on 5 counts of failing to pay over trust fund taxes. She went to trial in June 2025. The trial lasted 4 days. Prosecutors presented testimony for former employees. They showed bank records. They proved Heaven had been warned about her legal obligations and chose to ignore those warnings. At one point during the trial, Heaven's defense attorney tried to argue that her rent was a legitimate business expense. Why? Because Heaven occasionally hosted murder mystery parties at the Preston Hollow mansion for networking purposes. Yes, murder mystery parties. Heaven's argument was essentially, I rented a mansion for $10,000 a month using stolen tax money, but it's okay because sometimes I invited business contacts over for themed dinner parties. The jury wasn't impressed. After less than 1 hour of deliberation, they convicted Heaven on all 5 counts. At sentencing in December 2025, U.S. District Judge David Godbey sentenced Heaven to 97 months in federal prison. That's 8 years and 1 month. He also ordered her to pay $799,000 in restitution. U.S. Attorney Ryan Raybould said after the sentencing, the defendant lied to her employees and embezzled employment taxes due to greed. The substantial prison sentence of 8 years reflects the seriousness of the offense. The IRS Criminal Investigation Special Agent in charge added, Heaven Diaz stole from her employees and the American taxpayer to fund a lifestyle she didn't earn. She ignored repeated warnings, misused her position, and treated trust fund taxes like a personal bank account. Heaven Marie Diaz is 57 years old. She is currently serving her 97-month sentence in federal prison. She was sentenced just weeks ago in December 2025, so she's at the very beginning of her incarceration. She will serve approximately 82 months if she receives good time credit, which means she'll be released when she's about 64 years old. When she gets out, she'll owe nearly $800,000 in restitution to the IRS, plus whatever interest and penalties have accrued. Her staffing company, defunct. Her Preston Hollow mansion rental, obviously gone. Her luxury lifestyle, over. Her reputation, destroyed. Her employees who warned her, they were right. Heaven thought she was untouchable. She thought she could steal from the federal government, ignore warnings from employees and accountants, and continue living in a mansion funded by other people's tax money. She thought the murder mystery party defense would somehow make it okay. She was wrong. But Heaven's scheme was at least somewhat sophisticated in its execution. Our next case involves a woman who pulled off something far simpler, far bolder, and far more brazen. Tamara Starks, who submitted over 100 fraudulent Paycheck Protection Program loan applications and then posted on social media about her integrity. Case 4. Tamara Starks. Tamara Starks was a businesswoman from Mansfield, a suburb between Dallas and Fort Worth. Court documents don't detail exactly what businesses she and her husband owned before the pandemic, but we know they were entrepreneurs. They had companies, they had employees, they understood how business worked. And when the federal government announced the Paycheck Protection Program in 2020, offering forgivable loans to small businesses impacted by COVID shutdowns, Tamara saw an opportunity. Not an opportunity to help her business survive, an opportunity to get rich. The Paycheck Protection Program was designed to help struggling businesses keep employees on payroll during the pandemic. If you use the loan for approved expenses, primarily payroll, the loan would be forgiven. It was free money essentially, but only if you qualified and only if you used it correctly. Tamara decided to game the system. And she didn't do it small. She went big. From May 2020 to May 2021, Tamara and her co-conspirators submitted more than 100 fraudulent PPP loan applications. 100. Each application contained false payroll information and fake tax documentation for businesses that either didn't exist or didn't have the payroll they claimed. She submitted applications for companies she and her husband owned. She also helped other people submit fraudulent applications, essentially running a PPP pour-by fraud service. The total amount requested across all applications, $8.5 million. The amount they actually received, $4.5 million. But Tamara didn't stop at just submitting fake applications. Once the loans were funded, she directed recipients to set up your fraudulent payrolls through third-party vendors. These fake payrolls made it look like the PPP funds were being used for legitimate employee wages, when in reality, the employees were either fake or would receive their paychecks and then immediately return most of the money back to Tamara. This is called a kickback scheme. Tamara charged people a fee for helping them get fraudulent PPP loans. Once someone received their loan money, they paid Tamara a portion as payment for her services. She was literally running a fraud-for-hire operation. She used the stolen PPP funds for personal expenses and purchases. Prosecutors documented the money trail. Funds meant to help struggling businesses during a global pandemic went to Tamara's personal bank accounts and funded her lifestyle. Federal investigators from the FDIC Office of Inspector General, IRS Criminal Investigation, and Social Security Administration Office of Inspector General started piecing together Tamara's scheme. They tracked the applications. They followed the money. They identified the patterns. In September 2024, Tamara pleaded guilty to wire fraud. She admitted to orchestrating the scheme. She agreed to pay $4.47 million in restitution. Her sentencing was scheduled for January 2025. And on January 12th, 2025, just days before her sentencing hearing, Tamara posted this on social media. "I am never ashamed of anything I've done or faced. I handle every challenge with pride and dignity, never compromising my integrity or snaking the next person. I'm simply juggling the cards I've been dealt. Pride, dignity, integrity." Those were the words Tamara chose to describe herself, days before being sentenced for orchestrating an $8.5 million fraud scheme. On January 16th, 2025, Tamara appeared before U.S. District Judge Mark Pittman. The judge sentenced her to 86 months in federal prison. That's 7 years and 2 months. He also ordered her to pay $4.47 million in restitution. Tamara Starks is 42 years old. She is currently serving her 86-month sentence in federal prison, having just been sentenced in January 2025. She's at the very beginning of her incarceration. If she serves 85% of her sentence with good behavior, she'll be released when she's about 49 years old. She will owe $4.47 million in restitution to the federal government. That debt doesn't go away. It will follow her for the rest of her life, with interest compounding annually. The pandemic devastated millions of American small businesses. Real companies went under. Real people lost their livelihoods. The Paycheck Protection Program was designed to prevent that devastation. And Tamara Starks exploited a crisis for personal profit. Her social media post about integrity, it's still online. Federal prosecutors could use it in future cases as an example of a defendant showing zero remorse. The judge certainly noticed when someone commits massive fraud and then posts about their integrity days before sentencing, that's not a good look. But Tamara's fraud, while massive in dollar amount, didn't directly harm individuals the way our next case did. Belinda Juarez didn't steal from the government. She stole from her own employees, leaving them without health insurance during medical crises. And that betrayal might be the cruelest on this entire list. Case 5. Belinda Juarez. Belinda Juarez was the majority owner and CEO of Superior Home Health Service, a healthcare company based in San Antonio with additional locations across Texas. Home health services are essential for patients who need medical care but can't travel to hospitals or clinics. These companies send nurses, therapists, and aides to patients' homes. It's a noble business. It's also a profitable business. Belinda built Superior Home Health into a successful company with enough employees that offering group health insurance made sense. This wasn't a tiny startup. This was an established business with real operations and real revenue. Belinda lived in Bourne, an an affluent hill country town just outside San Antonio. She had the title. She had the income. She had the respect that comes with being a healthcare CEO. She was responsible for her employees' livelihoods and their benefits. And she betrayed that responsibility in the worst possible way. Superior Home Health Service offered employees the option to enroll in a company health insurance plan. Employees who enrolled had health insurance premiums deducted from their paychecks. This is standard. You work, you get paid, the company takes out your insurance premium, and the company sends that premium to the insurance provider. Everyone's covered. Starting in August 2017, Belinda stopped sending the insurance premiums to the providers. She just stopped. The insurance companies didn't receive payments. After multiple missed payments, they canceled the contracts. Superior Home Health employees no longer had health insurance. But here's the part that makes this truly evil. Belinda continued to withhold insurance premiums from employee paychecks. She kept taking the money. Employees looked at their pay stubs and saw insurance deductions. They had every reason to believe they were insured. They weren't. Belinda did not inform her employees that their insurance coverage had been canceled. She said nothing. She kept collecting premiums from paychecks and keeping the money in company bank accounts. Imagine you're one of Belinda's employees. You're a home health nurse making maybe $35,000 or $40,000 a year. You pay into the company health insurance every single paycheck because you can't afford to be uninsured. Then you get sick, or your kid gets sick, you go to the doctor, you need surgery, you have a medical crisis, and you find out at the hospital that you don't have insurance. Your claims are denied. You're stuck with thousands, maybe tens of thousands in medical bills. And when you ask your employer what happened, you discover your CEO stole your insurance premiums. That's exactly what happened to Belinda's employees. Some of them incurred massive medical costs, believing they were insured, only to discover they had no coverage. Belinda's theft didn't just cost them money, it devastated their financial lives during medical emergencies. But Belinda wasn't done stealing. She also failed to remit federal payroll taxes from 2016 to 2019. She withheld taxes from employee paychecks as required by law, but never sent over $1 million in collected taxes to the IRS. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the Department of Labor's Employee Benefit Security Administration launched an investigation. They interviewed former employees. They reviewed financial records. They documented the scheme. Belinda was indicted and eventually pleaded guilty to embezzling employee health insurance premiums and tax evasion. At her sentencing in January 2025, federal prosecutors laid out the full scope of the harm. The sentence needed to account for over $1 million in personal income tax liability. Belinda had stolen from her employees, stolen from the IRS, and caused catastrophic financial harm to people who trusted her. U.S. District Judge sentenced Belinda to 36 months in federal prison, 3 years. He also ordered her to pay $3.67 million in restitution to the IRS. Additionally, Belinda was ordered to pay $617,000 in restitution to her former employees for improperly withheld premiums and the resulting medical debts they incurred. She was also fined $20,000 and will serve 3 years of supervised release after completing her prison sentence. U.S. Attorney Jaime Esparza said, "Protecting the public treasury is one of the primary missions of federal law enforcement. It is even more important when, as in this case, there is direct harm to civilian victims. Not only did this defendant withhold millions in tax payments to the government, but the ill-gotten gains also came directly from the paychecks of her own employees. Acting Special Agent in Charge. Lucy Tan of IRS Criminal Investigations Houston Field Office added, Juarez let greed drive her to defraud the government and left her employees to face the horror of losing their health insurance when they needed it most. Belinda Jo Juarez is 53 years old. She is currently serving her 36-month sentence in federal prison, having been sentenced in January 2025. She's at the very beginning of her incarceration. When she's released in roughly 3 years, she'll owe over $4.2 million in restitution. She'll be a convicted felon. She'll be unemployable in health care. And she'll carry the reputation of being the CEO who stole health insurance from her own employees during their medical crises. There are white-collar criminals, and then there are people who commit acts of pure cruelty disguised as white-collar crime. What Belinda did falls into that second category. She didn't steal from a bank. She didn't defraud investors. She stole from working-class employees, many of whom were providing health care to vulnerable patients. She took money from people who could least afford to lose it, and she did it while they were dealing with surgeries, illnesses, and medical emergencies. That's not just fraud. That's betrayal at a level that's almost incomprehensible. But if you think stealing from your own employees is bad, wait until you hear about Vicki Lee Grisham, the small-town bank CEO, who spent almost a decade systematically embezzling from the community institution that trusted her. In a town of 16 blocks, everyone knew Vicki, and everyone thought she was honest. Case 6. Vicki Lee Grisham, Abernathy. Texas is not a big place. It's a small town in West Texas with about 2,000 people, 16 blocks. Everyone knows everyone. The kind of place where the local bank isn't just a financial institution, it's a community cornerstone. First State Bank of Abernathy was that institution, and Vicki Lee Grisham was its CEO and CFO. Vicki started working at First State Bank in 1992. For 10 years, she worked her way up. In 2002, she was promoted to Chief Financial Officer. She oversaw all aspects of bank finances. She was trusted with purchasing decisions. She was issued a bank credit card to buy business-related items. In a small town like Abernathy, being the bank CFO isn't just a job, it's a position of community trust. People deposit their paychecks at First State Bank. Local businesses keep their accounts there. Farmers deposit their harvest money. This isn't some corporate mega bank. This is where the people of Abernathy trust their money, and Vicki had access to all of it. Vicki was issued a company credit card with clear rules. Use it for business expenses. If she used it for personal purchases, she needed to reimburse the bank. Simple, straightforward. As CFO, Vicki was also responsible for reviewing the bank's financial statements. She reviewed the credit card statements. She paid the invoices. She oversaw everything. This meant Vicki was essentially monitoring herself. Starting in June 2019, Vicki began using the credit card for personal expenses. Not occasionally, systematically. She charged vacations, restaurant meals, clothing, her children's college tuition, her own personal income taxes. Let that sink in. Vicki Lee Grisham used stolen bank money to pay for her kids' college education and her own tax bill to the IRS. She concealed the unauthorized charges by manipulating the financial records she was responsible for reviewing. She paid the credit card bills with bank money, then ensured those charges didn't show up in ways that would raise red flags. For years, this worked. The scheme went undetected because Vicki was the one doing the detecting. By March 2023, Vicki had embezzled over $800,000. $800,000 from a small-town community bank. In March 2023, bank management finally discovered the fraud. They confronted Vicki. And on the same day she was confronted, Vicki signed a document admitting she had made unauthorized credit card charges from September 2014 to March 2023 for the benefit of herself, her family, and others. Almost 9 years. Almost 9 years of systematic theft. The FBI's Dallas field office launched an investigation. Federal prosecutors charged Vicki with theft, embezzlement, and misapplication by a bank officer. In June 2024, Vicki appeared before U.S. Magistrate Judge D. Gordon Bryant and pleaded guilty. At her sentencing hearing in December 2024, federal prosecutors presented the full scope of the harm. First State Bank of Abernathy was a small institution. $800,000 wasn't just a line item on a balance sheet. It was a significant financial blow to a community bank serving a town of 2,000 people. U.S. District Judge James Wesley Hendricks sentenced Vicki to 33 months in federal prison. He ordered her to pay $800,755 in restitution to the bank's insurer. He also sentenced her to 5 years of supervised release after completing her prison term. But the most devastating consequence might be this. As part of her plea agreement, Vicki was required to consent to an FDIC order of prohibition from further participation. This means Vicki Lee Grisham is permanently barred from any future employment with or participation in any FDIC-insured financial institution. She can never work in banking again. Ever. For the rest of her life, Vicki Lee Grisham is 52 years old. She is currently serving her 33-month sentence in federal prison, having been sentenced in December 2024. She's at the beginning of her incarceration. When she's released in roughly 2.5 years, she'll owe over $800,000 in restitution. She'll be unemployable in her chosen career field, and she'll return to a small town where everyone knows exactly what she did. In Abernathy, population 2,016 blocks across, there's no anonymity. Vicki can't hide. She can't move to a big city and start over with no one knowing her past. Everyone in Abernathy knows she was the bank CFO. Everyone knows she stole $800,000. Everyone knows she used bank money to pay for her kids' college. Tom Turner, the bank's CEO, attended Vicki's plea hearing. He expressed concerns about her bond conditions to the magistrate judge. This wasn't just a professional matter for him. This was personal. This was a betrayal of the entire community. Vicki worked at First State Bank for 31 years. She was promoted to CFO after a decade of building trust. She had every opportunity to live an honest, respectable life. She had a steady income. She had community respect. She had a career. And she threw it away to steal money for vacations and tuition payments. She didn't need to embezzle. She wanted to. She wanted the lifestyle the money could buy, and she didn't want to pay for it herself. But Vicki's betrayal of a small-town bank pales in comparison to what Theresa Portillo did to a credit union designed to serve women. Theresa didn't just embezzle. She bankrupted the entire institution, leaving hundreds of members without a financial home. Case 7. Theresa Portillo. Women's Southwest Federal Credit Union was exactly what it sounds like. A financial institution serving women in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Credit unions are different from banks. They're member-owned. They're not for profit. They exist to serve their members, not to maximize profit for shareholders. Theresa Portillo started working at WSFCU in 2001. She climbed the ranks. Eventually, she became Chief Executive Officer, the CEO, the top position. She was responsible for the credit union's operations, its financial health, and the trust of hundreds of members who relied on the institution. And Theresa betrayed that trust in spectacular fashion. From 2001 to October 2012, Theresa orchestrated a scheme so brazen, so systematic, that it ultimately destroyed the credit union. Here's how it worked. Credit unions invest member deposits in various financial instruments, including certificates of deposit. When a financial institution wanted to purchase a CD from Women's Southwest Federal Credit Union, they would wire the purchase funds. Theresa gave those financial institutions wiring instructions. But instead of having them wire the money to the credit union's official accounts, she directed them to wire the funds to a JP Morgan Chase account that was technically in the credit union's name, but that she controlled exclusively. This Chase account wasn't recorded on the credit union's general ledger. Credit union officials thought the account was inactive, but it wasn't inactive. Theresa was using it as her personal embezzlement account. After the financial institutions wired funds into the secret Chase account, Theresa would disperse the stolen money. She didn't wire it back to the credit union. She used it to buy things for herself, her family, and her friends. But Theresa didn't stop there. She also opened separate credit union accounts using false and fictitious names. She wrote checks to these fake identities to disperse stolen credit union funds. This created a paper trail that looked legitimate on the surface, but was completely fraudulent. What did Theresa buy with the stolen money? 9 parcels of real estate in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, a timeshare in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, diamond jewelry, 4 luxury watches, multiple motor vehicles. She used embezzled funds to pay credit card bills, fund vacations, pay family medical expenses, and remodel houses. Over 11 years, Theresa stole $3.43 million. The scheme unraveled in 2012 when auditors discovered discrepancies. The FBI launched an investigation. They traced the money. They identified the fake accounts. They documented the real estate purchases and the luxury items. In January 2013, Theresa pleaded guilty to 1 count of embezzlement of funds from a credit union. She faced up to 30 years in federal prison. At her sentencing hearing in June 2013, the former chairman of Women's Southwest Federal Credit Union testified, and what he said was devastating. Theresa's embezzlement scheme caused the credit union to become insolvent and bankrupt. Read that again? The credit union didn't just lose money, it went bankrupt. It ceased to exist. All those women who had accounts there, who had saved their money there, who had trusted the institution, they had to find new financial homes. Theresa Portillo bankrupted an entire credit union designed to serve women in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The institution collapsed under the weight of her fraud. U.S. District Judge Barbara M.G. Lynn sentenced Theresa to 78 months in federal prison. That's 6.5 years. She also ordered Theresa to pay $3.43 million in restitution. Additionally, Theresa was required to forfeit all 9 parcels of real estate, the Cabo timeshare, the diamond jewelry, the 4 luxury watches, and all other property purchased with stolen funds. Theresa Portillo is now in her 50s. She was sentenced in 2013, which means she's completed her federal prison sentence. She's been released, but her story doesn't have a happy ending. She owes $3.43 million in restitution. Federal restitution orders don't expire. They follow you forever. The government can garnish wages, seize tax refunds, and take any financial windfall you receive for the rest of your life until the restitution is paid. Theresa is a convicted felon. She's unemployable in the financial industry. She forfeited all her real estate. She lost the timeshare. The jewelry and watches were seized. Everything she bought with stolen money was taken. And most importantly, she destroyed an institution that served hundreds of women. Women's Southwest Federal Credit Union no longer exists because of Theresa's greed. Members lost their financial home. Employees lost their jobs. The community lost a resource. That's the lasting legacy of Theresa Portillo. Not just personal consequences, but institutional destruction. She didn't just hurt herself. She hurt an entire community of women who relied on that credit union. But as devastating as Theresa's crime was, we've saved the most shocking case for last. Remember Brenda Rodriguez from the beginning? The Houston healthcare administrator sentenced to 25 years? Now it's time to tell her full story. Because what Brenda did wasn't just fraud. It was a systematic scheme to exploit Medicare and vulnerable patients on a scale that shocked federal prosecutors. Case 8. Brenda Rodriguez. Brenda Rodriguez owned and operated QC Medical Clinic in Richmond, Texas, a suburb just southwest of Houston. Richmond is an affluent area. It's the kind of place where successful professionals live in nice homes, drive nice cars, and own thriving businesses. Brenda presented herself as exactly that, a successful healthcare entrepreneur. She ran a medical clinic. She worked with doctors. She served patients. On paper, QC Medical Clinic looked like a legitimate operation providing necessary medical services. But QC Medical wasn't what it appeared to be. It wasn't a clinic designed to help patients. It was a front for one of the most audacious Medicare fraud schemes federal prosecutors had ever seen. Here's how Brenda's scheme worked, and it's diabolical in its simplicity. Medicare pays for home health services when a patient is homebound and needs skilled nursing care, physical therapy, or other medical services that can be provided at home. But to qualify for Medicare-covered home health care, a doctor has to certify that the services are medically necessary. This certification is documented in what's called a plan of care. Brenda figured out that plans of care signed by doctors were valuable. Home health agencies needed them to bill Medicare. And Brenda had access to doctors who would sign plans of care. So Brenda created a business model. She paid doctors to approve patients for home health care, regardless of whether those patients actually needed it. The doctors signed the plans of care, And then Brenda sold those signed medical documents to various corrupt home health agencies. The home health agencies took those plans of care and billed Medicare for services. Sometimes the services were medically unnecessary. Other times, the services were never provided at all. It didn't matter. They had a doctor's signature on a plan of care, and Medicare paid the claims. From October 2012 through August 2015, Brenda ran this scheme continuously. She sold plans of care like a commodity. Home health agencies knew exactly what they were buying. Fraudulent medical documentation that would allow them to bill Medicare. The total amount billed to Medicare as a result of patients Brenda provided? $11 million. $11 million in false and fraudulent claims. But here's what makes this scheme particularly cruel. Brenda was exploiting vulnerable patients. Home health care patients are typically elderly, disabled, or recovering from serious illness. They're homebound. Their trust in the healthcare system to provide legitimate care, and Brenda turned them into pawns in a fraud scheme. Patients who didn't need home health services were signed up anyway. Their Medicare benefits were billed. In some cases, home health agencies sent workers to these patients' homes for unnecessary visits just to create a paper trail. In other cases, no services were provided at all, but Medicare was billed as if they were. This wasn't victimless fraud. This was exploitation of the most vulnerable people in our healthcare system. The FBI and the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General launched an investigation. They were part of the Medicare Fraud Strike Force, a joint initiative between the Department of Justice and HHS, specifically designed to combat healthcare fraud. Investigators followed the money. They identified the home health agencies purchasing plans of care from Brenda. They interviewed patients. They reviewed medical records. They documented the fraudulent claims. In January 2019, after a 3-day trial, a federal jury in Houston convicted Brenda Rodriguez of 1 count of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and 3 counts of healthcare fraud. U.S. District Judge Lynn H. Hughes presided over the trial, and at the sentencing hearing, prosecutors presented additional evidence of Brenda's role in the larger conspiracy. They argued that Brenda wasn't just a participant in the scheme. She was central to it. Without Brenda selling plans of care, the home health agencies couldn't have committed fraud on this scale. The judge agreed. In his ruling, Judge Hughes noted that, as part of a larger conspiracy, Brenda Rodriguez was responsible for all of the loss to taxpayers the scheme generated, not just her direct theft. All $11 million in fraudulent Medicare billing that flowed from the plans of care she sold. On May 4th, 2021, Judge Hughes sentenced Brenda Rodriguez to 300 months in federal prison. 300 months. That's 25 years. 25 years. He also sentenced her to 3 years of supervised release to begin immediately after she completes her prison term. Brenda Rodriguez is currently 58 years old. She is serving her 25-year sentence in federal prison right now. She began serving in 2021, which means she's about 4 years into her sentence. If she serves 85% of her sentence with good behavior, which is typical for federal inmates, she'll be released after approximately 21 years. That means Brenda Rodriguez will be about 79 years old when she walks out of federal prison. 25 years is an extraordinary sentence for a white-collar crime. For context, the average federal sentence for fraud is about 2 to 3 years. Even major fraudsters typically receive sentences in the 10 to 15-year range. 25 years is the kind of sentence usually reserved for violent crimes, large-scale drug trafficking, or the most egregious white-collar crimes. Why did Brenda receive such a harsh sentence? Because of the scale of the fraud and because of who she hurt. She didn't steal from a bank that was insured. She didn't defraud wealthy investors who could absorb the loss. She exploited Medicare, which means she stole from every American taxpayer. And she did it by turning vulnerable, elderly, and disabled patients into commodities. Judge Hughes made it clear. Brenda was responsible for every dollar of the $11 million fraud. She enabled it. She profited from it. And she showed no remorse. 3 other people have pleaded guilty or were convicted based on their roles in the larger fraudulent scheme involving QC Medical. Dr. John Ramirez was convicted of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and healthcare fraud for his role at a related purported clinic and is awaiting sentencing. 2 home health agency owners, Nena Iro and Magdalene Akaraman, each pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud in purchasing plans of care from QC Medical. But Brenda received the harshest sentence by far because she was the architect. She built the system. She created the market for fraudulent plans of care. Without her, the scheme doesn't exist. Brenda Rodriguez will spend most of the rest of her life in federal prison. She'll be elderly when she's released. If she's released, 25 years is a lifetime. Technology will change. The world will change. Her family will age. And she'll be behind bars. She owned a medical clinic in an affluent Houston suburb. She had a business, she had income, she had a life. And she threw it all away to sell fraudulent medical documents to home health agencies so they could steal from Medicare. Was it worth it? $11 million in fraudulent billing. 25 years in prison. Ask Brenda Rodriguez if it was worth it. 8 women, 8 Texas executives, 8 stories of wealth, fraud, and catastrophic falls from grace. Remember Brenda Rodriguez from the beginning? The Houston healthcare administrator sentenced to 25 years. She's still in federal prison. She's serving year 4 of 25. She has 2 decades left. 2 decades to think about the choice she made to sell fraudulent medical documents. 2 decades to regret turning vulnerable patients into pawns in a Medicare fraud scheme. But Brenda's not alone. Cara Obert, the Highland Park CFO, is in federal prison. Samantha Mueting, the San Antonio scammer, who continued defrauding people while on bail, is in federal prison. Heaven Diaz, who lived in Preston Hollow luxury on stolen tax money, is in federal prison. Tamara Starks, the PPP fraud queen, is in federal prison. Belinda Juarez, who stole health insurance from her own employees, is in federal prison. Vicki Grisham, the small town bank CEO, is in federal prison. And Theresa Portillo served her time and was released, but she owes $3.4 million in restitution she'll never be able to pay. These women had everything: education, success, wealth, respect. They had corner offices and country club memberships. They had nice homes and nice cars. They had opportunities most people never get, and they destroyed it all for money they didn't need. So tonight, as you're watching this video, maybe in your living room, maybe on your phone during your commute, ask yourself, what were they thinking? Did they believe they were too smart to get caught? Did they think their wealth insulated them from consequences? Did they rationalize the fraud as somehow justified? Because here's what we know for certain. They all got caught. Every single one of them. The FBI investigated them. Federal prosecutors built cases against them. Juries convicted them. Judges sentenced them. And now they're in federal prison, wearing the same clothes as every other inmate, eating the same food, sleeping in the same cells. Highland Park mansions don't matter in federal prison. CEO titles don't matter in federal prison. Designer wardrobes don't matter in federal prison. In federal prison, you're a number. You're an inmate. And you're serving your time like everyone else. Cara Obert learned that. Samantha Mueting learned that. Diaz learned that. Tamara Starks learned that. Belinda Juarez learned that. Vicki Grisham learned that. Theresa Portillo learned that. And Brenda Rodriguez is learning that every single day of her 25-year sentence. These 8 women thought they were untouchable. They thought they could commit fraud and walk away. They thought their positions, their wealth, their intelligence would protect them. They were wrong. And now they're paying the price. 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, 25 years. Those aren't abstract numbers. Those are years of their lives. Years they'll never get back. Years spent in federal prison while their families move on without them, while their children grow up visiting them in prison, while their former colleagues build careers and live free lives. Was it worth it? Ask these 8 women if it was worth it. The answer from every federal prison cell across America where they're serving their sentences is the same: no. If you're watching this and you don't support the crimes these women committed, if you believe in justice and accountability, then make sure to like and follow this channel as a form of support. Your subscription helps us highlight more cases like these and ensures stories like this reach the people who need to hear them. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. And if you want to see more cases like this, let us know in the comments. We'll keep investigating, keep researching, and keep bringing you the stories of wealthy executives who thought they were above the law. Until next time, stay informed, stay safe, and remember, federal prison doesn't care how much money you had on the outside.